When should you prioritize the running back position when building out your fantasy football rosters? That is what we're going to talk about today on RotoViz Overtime. We're going to have some other fun topics of conversation as we move through today's show as well. Shawn, we talked earlier this week around the quarterbacks, particularly the rookie quarterbacks, and if they are worth rostering in 2025. Obviously, our thoughts and conversation there will factor into should you draft them in a variety of formats, not just dynasty leagues, and how they would set you up. But Shawn also talked you through some of his favorite kind of late round wide receiver sleepers, I guess we can call them, on that edition. So I would highly recommend checking that out if you haven't done so already. Of course, you can get all the episodes by subscribing to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed, getting those episodes once they are available. Shawn, we're going to talk some running back strategy today. So I'm excited for that. We get a question that came in from Matthew, and we have a couple of listeners submitted questions on today's show. Always nice, Shawn, we hear from the community. And one of the things that I thought was cool about this email in particular was talking about, how we consume. I'm always interested how people listen to the shows, whether, they're heading to work or whatever. Matthew mentioned specifically that we help him get through his jogs, when he's out running. So I thought that was pretty fun. You can kind of imagine him trotting along there, building up the fitness, but talking some fantasy football strategy. But he mentioned that we have discussed his teams a couple of times over the years, but he has thought that he has an evergreen topic that could be good for fantasy managers like himself. He said, in a rebuild, when is the time to prioritize the running back position? I think we were going to have a spoiler before I get to the end of the question. Shawn, I think the time to prioritize is always at this moment in time, but he mentions that he did buy a FFPC Superflex Orphan team for $1 a couple of years ago. When we did buy the team that we bought as well, Shawn, we did a series, the Dynasty Reanimators, and it did spur a lot of people into jumping aboard and getting some of those rosters. So he mentioned he inherited no picks going into his first draft. His top players were Travis Kelce, Stephon Diggs, Russell Wilson, which he moved on as quick as he could. But he mentioned how the team has gone, picking up some of the overtime favorite players. And over the last couple of seasons now, his team has Daniels and May at QB. He has Neighbors Worthy, Travis Hunter, Jordan Addison, Jaden Waddle, Downs, and Noel at wide receiver. And then at tight end, he has Tucker Kraft, Cole Kmet, and just drafted Fanning and Terrence Ferguson. Picked up Chuba Hubbard for the 204 prior to the draft. Has some other veteran running backs in Warren, Javonte Williams, MarShawn Lloyd, and just drafted Jaquaz Hunter, Rashad Smith, Ollie Gordon, and LaQuint Allen. But he mentioned that he can't roster everybody. A little bit like we talked about in the show earlier this week, Shawn, where we have a situation where we are going to have to cut down on the players, but you can still move them post NFL draft. He mentioned that it isn't a Triflex league; it's standard Superflex. But the question really that he has is, how should he be handling the position of running back prior to the start of the 2025 season? Find it difficult with some of the trades he's offered to be able to acquire some of the higher end players, one of them being Breece Hall, that he has been unsuccessful to acquire. So Shawn, looking through everything, it's a case of he's wondering if he should head into the year with the roster as it is and see what materializes, or should he try and strike now? So what's your thoughts here? Not necessarily on the roster starting off, but when should you be prioritizing the running back position, or I guess any position when you're trying to build out a team that can eventually move into a perpetually reloading team in the championship window? Because this is a team, as he mentioned, took over for $1. You get the $1 team shot when there's not a lot on offer. It's an aging out team, like we mentioned with some of the players that he had originally. It's really starting to turn around, but just the prioritizing the position off the team, is that something that we should be doing on a consistent basis rather than trying to do it in a certain order?
Colm, I think that your note about the time is now was both fun and really gets at the heart of what we're trying to do in Dynasty, where you simultaneously want to approach every roster and every move with a ton of patience. Because if you can be patient and you can continue to spin these players and picks for the long term, then you're going to build up rosters that are pretty crazy. So I'm going to have the full 2025 version of perpetual reloading and the permanent championship window out, maybe even as this show goes live. But it'll look at those 8 Triflex teams and sort of discuss where they were, what they accomplished, what part of the build that they are in, and how you get there. What does the future look like? But I think for a lot of the listeners, they'll know that the end of last season was extremely exciting because there were a bunch of titles. And then within that, the team still had a lot of picks. And so we get up to having, 5, 6, 10 more players than we have roster spots for. That's not necessarily a problem. We can be patient with that through the summer, eventually make some trades. And probably you're just going to simply have to cut some of the guys, but that's not a problem either, right? We think about what that means. And it means that as we go through time, we end up building up rosters that are so powerful that they don't have weaknesses. They are stronger than the best possible redraft team. You kind of want to be getting to the point where you look at your roster and you're thinking, okay, from a redraft position, this team has 3 guys going in round 1, 3 guys going in round 2, 3 guys going in round 3. And even if it's not quite to that extent, if it's like 2, 3, 1, but then 4, then you're looking at a team that is going to be difficult for most other teams to beat. Now, you have to get to that point in part because there are going to be other savvy managers who build their teams up, and in part because in any given dynasty league, you have anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 teams that are rebuilding, and their teams are weaker than the vast majority of just normally drafted redraft teams. Your team has to balance that out being on the high side. As we come back to this question, though, it is a matter of how do we accomplish these intermediate objectives as we exhibit patience. And I think that your point about the time is now is that we want to make sure that anytime an opportunity comes up to address any of our big needs, that we go ahead and accomplish that. At the same time, we don't make a move that overall makes the roster, and the roster as it relates to the assets both now and in the future, weaker. That's where we get out of the permanent championship window, right? That's where we start to target these windows that are really small, and or we have a rebuilding team that kind of shuts off the rebuilding element just barely too early. Because patience is tough. It is tough to take over a team that's weak and do a good job of building it up, but at some point you want to win, right? And so as you start to get anxious for those wins to come, sometimes you can shut down the rebuild before you're quite there. And then you end up a year or 2 later, you're like, I'm back into the rebuild. That's what we talk about the reload, right? We're perpetually reloading because we just want the team to be fantastic all of the time. If you're not up into that portion where you can really say that you're out of the rebuild into the reload, then you're certainly not early enough. And then once you're into the reload, it's again, like, how do I accomplish the objectives, the big picture objectives best right now? So Colm, we think about some of the things that I have noted as being the goals for these elite dynasty teams, right? We talk all the time about how QBs are overrated, and yet as we're trying to build these juggernauts, you are looking to eventually get yourself an elite QB when that opportunity arises, as opposed to pressing for it just because you're saying, well, I have to have one, I'm going to address it now, and then you end up giving up a lot of value and still just having a mediocre QB. You do want to have at least 1, if not 2 star running backs, but you have to wait for the moment where you can actually accomplish that. You want to build this deep, powerful group of wide receivers where maybe you don't have Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. There are only a couple of those guys, but you have 5, 6, 7, 8 to 10 really dynamic receiving options to where you can hit these receiver spots, you're going to be good. You can hit the flex spots, you're going to be good. And then obviously we want to have Colm at least 1, if not. And some of this is just in some ways fortuitous or fortunate in that we have hit on our tight end recommendations recently. So a lot of the teams have 2 out of the 3 of Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, and Brock Bowers. If you're starting from scratch right now and you don't have those guys, it's not just a simple thing of saying, oh, just wave your hand and go out and get multiple tight ends who, like in an FFPC redraft, are going to be going in the first round. That doesn't just happen. But over time, we want to build to that area. So then we think of what we're saying is like, basically we're saying we want to have stars everywhere. you could boil it down to that. I feel like you didn't need to really go through the positions. You're just saying you want a great team. But as we get there, we have to address each individual opportunity on its own merits. And so if and when Matthew has a situation here to really address running back in a dynamic way, I think you should do it. The intermediate move here for a Chuba Hubbard, I think that Hubbard is going to be very good. Whether or not the 204 would have been better spent on Higgins or Scadaboo and Tootin, that's going to always be tough to say. But I do really like Hubbard. I think he's a very undervalued player overall. We look at some of the other guys here. I think that Jaylen Warren is going to have a fantastic season. So from that perspective, if you simply have Hubbard and Warren and you don't have injuries, which we know there are going to be injuries, but that's a probably pretty good starting place.
Yeah.
You love those picks of Hunter and Smith. And I think there's a real chance that Gordon hits, but maybe you don't know until you have to cut him. Maybe you don't know until you've traded him for really not that much as you're just managing your roster. Maybe you don't know until 2026, which again, the question is like, how do I get where I want to go this year? The issue here is that a couple of the guys that we've recommended in the past, and Javonte Williams and MarShawn Lloyd, don't have a lot of value. So, I mean, Williams was an epic bust last year. That was, certainly very frustrating. MarShawn Lloyd didn't stay healthy. That part was pretty frustrating. Colm, as you're looking at this, would you simply, Javonte Williams has a very aggressive redraft ADP for how fantastically terrible he was last year. Would you just move him for basically anything, right? I mean, you don't really know if in the middle of August people are like, oh, well, no one has really taken it from him. Colm, I had this.
I think that's what's going to happen. I think some people, and he at the moment, I think he will be the projected starter. I know we like Miles Sanders. We like Jaden Blue. We've done a lot of talking about Jaden Blue. You and Ben did a great show last week where you kind of dove even further in depth into his profile and situation. But all things considered at the moment, I think across the fantasy community, the consensus would be that Williams should be the starting running back when the season starts. And I think that gives you maybe a selling window here with him. It's interesting. And the rest of the question, part of it was that he had offered Addison and Waddle to the Breece Hall owner, but that was rejected. But it might be a case where somebody has more value on Jameson Williams than a Waddle based on the situation at the moment and how the performances have been. Not something that I would be on the opposite side, but I do think that if you took a poll of 100 fantasy managers, that you could find people split on what the decision is. So I think you could potentially.
You got to find those people who are drafting him right now in best ball. Be like, do you play Dynasty?
Yeah, do you
Can I send you a trade offer?
Second round pick, please. But I also think the MarShawn, there's a real chance that there's some bounce back here for Javonte's value either now or over the next kind of 4 months before the NFL season starts, and he could be a piece that somebody is interested in acquiring if they're looking at it in a certain way. MarShawn Lloyd too, Shawn. I think this was off air. I did joke that one of the winners of the NFL draft was MarShawn Lloyd because the Packers didn't really make the move at running back. It's Josh Jacobs at the moment, but it's Emmanuel Wilson, MarShawn Lloyd, and Chris Brooks behind that. And I think that, he is second on that depth chart, in my opinion. And he just had a snake bit situation last year, gets drafted, gets the injury in training camp. Then, he's coming back eventually on injured reserve. And then he has appendicitis and has to have his appendix removed, rules him out for the rest of the season. So he had a real unfortunate run there. So I think they're both pretty interesting players. And I think when you're looking at the running back room here, it's not the elite end running backs, but Warren and Hubbard. I think Hubbard for the 204. You mentioned some of the names you would like there, and Higgins, Scadaboo, for example. But I think Hubbard at that point, if they're gone at the 201, 202, would be sensational value in terms of the next tier of player. So I really did like that move for the 204 for him. I think the running back room is set up better here than as maybe been anticipated by Matt. And then the other part of it is I do think there's a window here to potentially move Williams.
And so one of the things we want to be thinking about with the running backs is not even so much like, how do I address this position or how do I get starters that I'm more comfortable with, but a matter of how do we maximize the total value of the roster and all the assets. And that may mean actually trading a running back away. One of the things with MarShawn Lloyd, I think he's a pretty interesting player. We liked him last year because he was so dynamic when he did play in college. One of the issues you ran into with evaluating him is like he was so good when he played. Why did his teams not give him more work? You may have seen a little bit of that last year with the Packers, or it may merely have been bad luck. I mean, obviously the injuries are things where you're not going to be like, well, give him touches while he's injured. That's not the way that it works. I would guess that he bounces back and has maybe not quite to the level that Charbonnet had, maybe not quite to the level that Bigsby had, but has a season like that in year two. I mean, he's one of the guys, and we talk about this all the time. What are the types of running back profiles where you would expect them to immediately put pressure on the starter and push him to the side? And which are the profiles where, you probably are expecting that to happen in the second year? One of the things that's kind of interesting in the Rams situation is that they drafted someone last year in Colm where really you would have expected the pressure to be in year two. And yet, because there was anticipated pressure in year one and it didn't really happen, that now they've added a second player for pressure to where you have a guy who could be the year two pressure or the guy who could do the year one pressure. I mean, Hunter is a better prospect than Blake Corum, and so he's probably at least slightly better positioned to actually put pressure on right away. But because the anticipated pressure didn't materialize last year, now Kyren Williams in seasonal is actually being looked at as a little bit stronger choice to simply have that moat to hold up. That part is probably not the right way to look at it. Now, we don't know. We can't tell the future with running backs. Maybe it works out just fine. But as we think about how players should be priced, what the different scenarios are, what probabilities you should attach to those scenarios, that's probably not correct. And I love having Jarquez Hunter on this roster because he could actually be a guy who right away in 2025 does some value for you, score some points, what have you. Lloyd is someone where if you end up having a trade offer that already prices him at that sort of bounce back to a Charbonnet level or a bounce back to a Bigsby level, maybe you just take that right away as opposed to like having to actually get the production to justify that. I don't think that we're there, Colm. You and I do believe had Lloyd in one of our leagues, and there wasn't any sort of dog pile pushing people out of the way to like get out there and draft him. But there may be a point this summer or this fall where that occurs. And again, you might just prefer to have the future draft assets as opposed to have the contingent upside for him in 2025. Thinking about this, I mean, this is the type of team here where it looks like a good team, certainly understand the desire to go ahead and win. I think it's positioned nicely to be one of those teams that is kind of at the edge. Well, that arrives early. That would be great. But you think about how the Triflex works. And again, this isn't Triflex, but the FFPC works where you have the backdraw, right? And if you finish sixth and your team is on the rise, and then you sneak through the quarters, suddenly you're in this 2-week, 4-team free-for-all where you could definitely win, right? You can be the 6th seed and you can win. You end up being the 7th seed and your team is powerful. You didn't like try and intentionally miss the playoffs and actually have a team that's not quite good enough to win the backdraw. You finish 7th, you win the backdraw, you get the 101 for 2026. Colm, you and I just talked about in the previous show, like how much of a huge weapon that was in a draft that we did for one of the orphans that we took over. I mean, in some ways that's probably, and other than actually just winning the title next year, that's probably the best outcome, where in 2026, you have the 101, the 201, the 301, the 401, even the 501. We talked about how the 501 for us was Trevor Etienne, a guy that we really like. You do that, then you can address this really high-level issue of how do I get the key superstar that I need? Maybe a year from now, it won't be running back. Maybe it'll be something else. And maybe a year from now, the best player, and you still are going to probably want to take the best player. Maybe that won't fit perfectly with your position of greatest need, but then you can make additional trades. So that's how I would set this team up is you can be the 6th seed and go win it all. You can be the 7th seed and get the 101 for 2026. And you can continue to kind of juggle and try to maximize your running back position to the best of your ability along the way.
Yeah, and the point I was making about the arrive early, it feels like a team that maybe needs one more year to make some more moves, get another draft, and then it's like really ready to take off. But there is enough potential here that if things break in the right way and players are hitting here as rookies, that you push yourself into the playoff picture. But I think that it's a fun topic to run through. Hopefully that has helped Matthew on his morning run as we talk through the scenarios there for the running back position. Next question comes in from Josh. And Shawn, I think this is a good thing to do. We talk about like taking stock of your teams at the end of the season, and it's another thing you can do post rookie draft, but kind of looking critically at the team to see where you may be missing some spots. And in this question, he phrases it as that he may have potentially some blind spots, even though he really likes the roster. So he wanted to get our thoughts on it. Both guys have shared really nice thoughts on the show, rookie draft week, and all the stuff that we've talked about through in the years of listening to the podcast and things. So that is always a pleasure to read through. I'll spare the listening audience from running through it. But he was wondering about his particular roster. It's a 12-team PPR, 3 wide receiver, 2 flex, super flex format that isn't tight end premium. 22 roster spots have 3 taxi squad spots for rookies. Before the NFL draft, he moved Etienne, Tracy, Jalen Warren, Tyjae Spears, Kendry Miller, Sinat, Troy Franklin, Wan'Dale Robinson, Quentin Johnson to acquire more picks, and he ended up with 10 picks in the 3 rounds of the draft. So in terms of the roster, Shawn, it's Herbert, Nix, Jones, quarterback, Achan, Irving, Jaquarius Hunter, Brasha Smith, Jaden Blue, Scadaboo, Tootin, Trevion Henderson at running back. Tight end is Laporta, Evan Ingram. Wide receivers, Waddle, Higgins, Worthy, JSN, Brian Thomas, Marvin Mims, Travis Hunter, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Royals, and then Taxius Fanning, Torrey Holt, Harting, and Lambert Smith, who we talked about in the previous episode. Future picks, no 2026 first, but it's 2 seconds, 3 thirds, 2027, 1 first, 2 seconds, 2 thirds, 2028, first, second, and third. In 2024, he barely missed the playoffs, but scored the most points by far in the playoff week. So he was peaking at the right time with a young team. He went deep into the young rookie class and picked up some exciting wide receiver depth as well. So what his question is are there any kind of moves that he should be making with this roster to really push it forward? And he said he feels pretty good about it, set up to compete for several years, but is open to the fact that he may have blind spots that he may be missing out. And he's wanting to learn and continue to use the RotoViz principles. Shawn, I think this team, again, is set up really nicely, and it was very smart before the NFL draft with the conversations we were having about the running back position and where some of the squeeze may come. We talked about Warren a minute ago being a player we like, but he has some competition there now with Johnson. Tyrone Tracy has competition from one of your favorites here in Scadabo. And then we have Etienne, with Tootin. It's interesting. He moved the players that he moved before the draft. He picked up the players who was coming into the same offense. But looking at it, Shawn, lots of picks in the draft, the 10 picks. No first next year, but like us on the roster, we talked about on the Monday episode, but lots of interesting picks and players to talk about here. So I'll let you go first without setting it up in any particular way, but how do you feel about the roster, first of all, before we go into the picture of how we can move it forward? Here's a question. He said that it's a team that can compete. Is this team a competing team?
And this team should win, right? But you can't completely control that. You don't know what injuries you're going to get, and you don't know exactly what numbers your players are going to score in weeks 16 and 17, even if you have the best overall team. Now, I could understand somebody looking at it saying, well, this team is obviously going to be the best team in 2026, the best team in 2027. Maybe you're still a little bit young in 2025, but you think about the guys here in Henderson, Scadaboo, Tootin. I mean, we would expect Henderson to score right away. We would expect those other 2 guys to really be scoring by playoff time. You look at Travis Hunter and Jaden Higgins. I mean, again, we expect those guys to score right away, but certainly by playoff time. The team is not structured in such a way that it has to have those guys score early in order to set itself up to certainly make the playoffs, but even to get a bye. You have the power at tight end. You've got the interesting taxi picks. In a perfect world, you would upgrade your QBs a little bit what you're looking at here is, how much does the picks of Gadsden, Lambert Smith, Trey Harris, how much does that really push this Chargers passing attack to where Herbert can score for you? Bo Nix has been valued pretty aggressively by the fantasy community this year. Are we going to get scoring that really reflects that ADP? Is Daniel Jones going to win the job in his battle with Anthony Richardson? Maybe you can make some moves to package some people and upgrade from Herbert because he's so good and the situation now is so stable that some dynasty managers will probably value him above his scoring level just for the safety components, and the safety components do matter. I'm not saying to ignore those, but if you are a very active manager and you have a lot of future picks and you have a deep roster yourself, the safety isn't as important to you, because if you do end up making a move that backfires, you have enough depth and you have enough flexibility to overcome it. So maybe you can make a move for a higher ceiling. The tricky part is just always with these quarterback moves, you have a less of a liquid market to get all of those things done. You might be kind of stuck with these guys, and being stuck with players like Herbert and Nix, that's a good situation to be in.
Then when we look, like, there's a lot of talent across this roster, and sometimes we have rosters that are top heavy and not as much depth, but there is two startable options at tight end, Laporta and Ingram. Wide receiver in particular, Shawn, you have the likes of Higgins, JSN, Brian Thomas, set end starters, and then you're looking at like Worthy, Waddle, Travis Hunter, Jaden Higgins, Jaden Royals, and behind that, a lot of depth at the wide receiver position as well, with the taxi squad options. Like I mentioned, the two tight ends. Fanning, I think, pretty quickly could become a startable tight end. QB looks like the one area where there could be those question marks about, and where, as you talked through already, you could make some movements there. He asked if there was any blind spots in terms of the team being a contender. I don't really see that there is. Do you see any areas that I'm missing here as to where specifically there should be moves made?
Well, some dynasty managers simply like more veteran teams, and once they get a lot of total value on the team, they will do some consolidation to try and get that safe veteran player with a really high floor. That kind of works against some of the principles that we like. And so if they're blind spots, they're probably blind spots that, wash back on us as well, where we have similar blind spots. I don't think that, but again, you think about even what wins seasonal leagues are teams like this, as opposed to the teams that people believe win, right? And then again, just every year is a little bit different. In 2024, we had the year of the veteran running back. In 2023, we had the year of the veteran receiver. It's not that veterans don't occasionally stay healthy and generally play to their ADPs. They will occasionally do that. And those years give ammunition for people who want to draft that way and want to believe that that's the way that you do it, to continue to do something that's not perfectly optimal and allow us to continue to pursue strategies that are better and that will work to, again, create these permanent windows and just to give you more upside even in the individual years, which you also want. Colm, we talk about tiny little things. You could maybe move a Jaden Blue, who might be a little bit superfluous on this roster, and be able to acquire maybe a pick and Terrence Ferguson. Now, based on where they're going right now, you probably wouldn't be able to get both, but maybe in a month when it's obvious that Blue is undervalued, you would be able to get both. If we don't really hear anything about Terrence Ferguson over the next 60 days, maybe you could make that kind of move. I think having an addition, a really fun, say taxi-ish tight end would be cool. But again, this roster is loaded.
On the wide receivers, I want to give them some more answers here. So on the wide receivers, we have a lot of names that we mentioned out there. You can't pick Waddle because he's the veteran one who probably has lost the most value out of this group. But which of those wide receivers is your sell for this offseason?
Well, I think you could potentially sell JSN and then
that's the answer, yeah.
Reacquire him. It's really frustrating that would be the answer. But he does seem to have now kind of studied himself from a value perspective in a range that is a strong range, even an enthusiastic range. You can make that move and maybe take a little bit of the risk away of, I mean, we've articulated our concerns about the Saints, but the Seahawks also have done some things this offseason that are a little bit nerve-wracking. You see all the scoring that Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison did last year, and you're like, okay, well, if Sam Darnold can do that, I'm okay. But you also think back to all of the times that Jordan Addison is wide open for additional long touchdowns and Darnold didn't get in the ball. There are going to be a lot of plays where JSN is open all over the field and the ball isn't on him this year. And when those plays happen, you're like, why did the Seahawks move on from a competent QB and not bring in a competent QB to back him up?
Yeah, some of the plays last year, particularly, the scoring plays, touchdown plays to JSN were, perfectly. There was some unperfectly thrown balls last year by Geno, but some perfectly thrown touchdown passes, which I don't know if Darnold's going to squeeze them and outdoors into those tight windows. So we'll see what happens there. But he feels like somebody who has really rebounded in value, who we really like, but maybe now at a peak where there's a chance to sell him. And we're looking at trying to keep as many young players on these rosters, but on this roster, he may be the one that has significant value that you could move this season. And as Shawn even mentioned, potentially reacquire him in future. But that is where we're going to finish it up for this edition of RotoViz Overtime. Thank you to the guys who sent in the questions for this episode, Josh and Matt. We will be back with more content next week. I'm going to be talking with Pat Corain this week. It may already be available on the RotoViz Fantasy Football channel, so check that one out. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at @OvertimeIreland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of his work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.